Great, thank you. Sorry, I'm getting my cheat sheet out. Good morning, everyone. I want to welcome everyone to the February 1st MAPC officers meeting to order. Before we start, I need to do a little housekeeping. Hold on. This meeting is being conducted remotely via Zoom video conference consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020. To provide public access to the meeting while limiting the potential for abuse of video conferencing technology, we are live streaming and recording today's session to our YouTube channel. Since this is an open meeting, people from the public may participate in this way, and a saved copy is also accessible via our MAPC YouTube channel, which is www.youtube.com/user/MAPC Metro Boston. So thank you for all indulging me in that. I hope everyone is doing great this morning. And the next item on our agenda is the approval from last month's meeting. Yes, Sandra?
Roll call.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Sandra. I'm a little out of service here. So, okay, so we're gonna do attendance. Treasurer Sam.
Here.
Secretary Sandra.
Here.
VP Adam.
Here.
President Aaron here. Thank you, Sandra. All right, now next up on the agenda, the whole speech kind of threw me off there, is the approval of minutes from January 4th, 2021. Yes, Sandra?
I have a few suggested, just most very, very minor typo, a couple typos, but one slightly, I don't know if it's possible to put up so people can see.
Sasha, would
Heidi,
you?
are you?
Yes,
Yes, I can
Heidi.
do that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
They're not a big deal, but I just,
Is it possible to share this document on the screen or not?
Yeah, that's what Sasha's doing right now.
Okay.
I just want to confirm if this is the officers meeting agenda or the executive committee.
It's
The
not,
officers
it's the
meeting
minutes
minutes.
from January.
Second.
Awesome.
okay, thanks. So, just on page 2, just for clarity, the last paragraph, it says, page 2, keep scrolling, please. It says Ms. Davis, blah, 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 and it says along with that of our mayors and managers. Can you just put in town managers? Because it could be MAPC managers, and I just think that would be clearer. Thanks. And then on page 3.
Sandra, could I possibly just note there are city managers as well? So
Perhaps
can we say municipal?
Okay, thanks. Okay, so then on page 3, where it says Ms. Hackman asked if anyone is looking at what really went wrong with the US response. I was referring to the state response. A lot of people
Okay.
look at the US response, but no one that I know of is looking, well, anyway, in a formal way. Okay, so thanks. And then we are pivoting. Let's see, there's something else that I had. Oh, there's a typo.
Yes. A municipal breakfast, no L.
Yeah. And then on the same page down, down where it says CECP, it's not identified where that's coming from. I just would put the state or something. It's like if you don't know what it is.
Well, may I suggest, Sasha, in the title, if you put parenthetically CECP.
Thanks. And then there's a THE, the missing, help. Okay, at the last line, can help with Commonwealth, can help the Commonwealth. That's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sandra. Did anyone else have any other comments or edits on the document? Great. So I'm going to look for a motion I'm going to look for a motion at this time.
Motion to
And-
approve. Motion to approve as amended.
Okay, great. In a second?
Second.
Okay, motion made by Adam, second made by Sam. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, great. Roll calls required. Sam?
Yes.
Sandra?
Yes.
Adam?
Yes.
Erin? Yes. Motion approved. Thank you, everyone. Next up on the agenda is review of contracts. I understand that we're actually going to do that next month at next month's meeting. So that is great. Thank you so much for that update, Mark. So we'll just keep it moving and go on to hiring and staffing changes. If Mark
Rebecca?
or
Rebecca, can you do this?
Okay.
Sure. I never know where we've left off, but I will say that Mark and I have been doing a lot of interviews for finalist appointments. We are now in the process of filling those vacancies that we had put a hold on at the beginning. So we now have our data services position filled. We have had an offer accepted in our transportation department. So we're excited to have a new staff member there. We have an offer out or offers about to be out in our economic development, clean energy, and environment departments. I think Mark and I have been really impressed by the caliber of candidates that are coming through the finalist round. And we're about to have a brand new cohort of new staff members on board that, we're calling it our remote cohort. We're going to try to give them some extra support. We, haven't brought on this many people remotely ever before. We are doing interviews either this week or next week for a finalist for a legal counsel position. And so, staffing and hiring is really moving along at a pace. And then we will be posting our new director position. Previously, we had called this the Director of Operations. We've done a lot of reflecting and I think really tweaked the job description. And we are now going to, I think, be calling it our Director of Equity, Culture, and Operations, and really kind of try to focus. They'll be overseeing HR operations as well as our internal equity work. Sandra, sorry. Go ahead.
Quick question. So did this not get filled before? And so we're reposting it? Is that the?
Correct. So we did not fill this. We had gotten through our first finalist round, I think right before March. And then we decided to take a pause on it. It's in the budget in a mid-year position along with filling these other vacancies. And so, that's why we're now moving along with it.
We had a good candidate. We had two good candidates. We offered the job to one person who subsequently declined and decided to stay at her previous employer. I think we were probably used as leverage a little bit, but that happens sometimes. And we decided we did not wish to offer to the second person. And then the pandemic hit. So now we're resurfacing it. But people sometimes don't clearly remember that although Jen Garcia has been our chief counsel, she has served as director of operations for a while. And she is still, she's still working for MAPC, I think like 75% time, something like that, even though she's in Texas. And of course, that no longer matters anymore. I think a lot of my staff are in various parts of the country that I don't necessarily know about. But now, Jennifer is going to move away from that gradually. And we want to have an onboarding period during which she is still on board and the new person is on board. And then eventually that will transition to a new person. The Director of Equity, Culture, and Operations, which I am assuming everybody is going to start referring to as the DECO, but maybe not. We shall see.
I think we'll probably just start calling the candidate by their name once we have them.
That would be nice, yes.
I would hope. Sam?
So just on that, so Jen was doing legal and also operations, and now you've got two people. You've got a legal person coming on and an operations person coming on.
Was always envisioned as two jobs.
The
Jen-
legal person,
yeah.
Sorry, I just want to be clear. The legal person is to replace Rosalind Valsamond, who
Right.
has been our legal counsel. This is not so it's a replacement for a different legal counsel position.
Yeah.
Margie is the
And then- and
general
just to-
counsel.
Just to confirm, these are all mid-year. These were budgeted for mid-year anyway, so that's all
Correct.
cooked in there. Okay. Okay. Those
To
are
be
my
to be
questions.
crystal clear, Margie is our general counsel. Her
Yeah.
assistant, even though we did not usually use the word assistant, was Rosalind Valsamond. Rosalind left. We are now filling that position under Margie. Margie is actively engaged in that search. And then we will have the director of operations replacing eventually Jen Garcia.
Great.
Okay.
And it almost seemed like everything kind of worked out because the pivot sounds more appropriate anyway.
I don't
Let's
know. I
integrate-
think,
Mark, sunshine. Yes, it's a good thing.
yes.
It'll be great.
Okay.
Okay, great.
Rebecca has had to work very hard, however, in this long period of time that there wasn't a full-time director of operations. So I want to acknowledge that.
Well, thank you, Rebecca, for doing that. Other duties as assigned, right? Okay, great.
Always. Yeah.
Okay, great. So next up is the project update. And I don't believe we have a project update, correct? So instead, we're going to be doing a COVID response. And I see Barry and Mark, cameras off, but here. And is Lizzie joining us?
No.
Okay, so just Barry and Mark. Hi. Oh, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt your breakfast.
To be clear, Lizzie is always very deeply engaged in this work, but she has another obligation, or the early mornings can be difficult for her with the girls. So, but we have the team here, and Rebecca's going to lead us through this discussion, and others may have comments and suggestions.
Okay,
Sure.
great.
I thought I would start with some kind of high level pieces or that are coming along that are not, they are part of the public health response, but a little bit separate from that, and then ask Barry and Mark to really kind of dig into the public health response. So just so folks know, we have ongoing work to support our communities with economic recovery. And there is this local recovery grant program, which we are working with our communities to apply for. The state's putting out $10 million there, and Betsy Cowan and her team are working hard on that. At the same time, there is some funding that's coming from the Mass Technology Collaborative to support gateway cities with some digital divide work. And just so folks know, we're in conversations with the Mass Tech Collaborative to potentially apply on behalf of all of our gateway cities. It's about $90,000 per community. And so far, I think the program's been a little bit of bumpy start. They first reached out to actually internet providers and didn't get any responses to their RFP. And so we're now talking with those communities and the Mass Tech Collaborative about whether we could play some sort of aggregating role to help get that funding out to communities. Sandra? Sorry.
Question, which are our gateway cities?
So our gateway, and I don't know if I'm going to get them all, but I will try. Revere, Chelsea, Lynn, Everett, I think Salem, Danvers, maybe Quincy. I think that's it, but I might be missing some. Malden, did I not say Malden? So anyways, we have the list. Sorry, I don't think I did it all. I got them all. It's a definition in statute though. So that's another way that we're continuing to try to help support our communities. This is funding to get boosters for internet that communities can decide where they want these boosters to go, whether it's a community center or a school or a certain neighborhood. So that's some of the kind of more recovery, public health facing work that we continue to do. Additionally, we have been invited by the Barr Foundation to continue our partnership with the Mystic River Collaborative to really provide funding for heat related COVID response. We're now going to move that to extreme weather, and it's really both to kind of think about how do we continue our near term support to communities as well as longer term policy solutions as we move forward. Thank you, Erin. There we go. There are the gateway cities, which we don't have all of them. So we are re-upping. We're actually putting that application in today, and that will be another year's worth of work to really work with again, a targeted set of communities on both heat and, hopefully actually some other extreme weather response to support those communities moving forward. Then additionally, I would say, and I'm going to ask Barry and Mark to jump into this in more detail, and Adam, of course, if he wants to comment. I think there's been a lot of back and forth with our communities, really kind of trying to focus on the vaccine rollout, the role of local boards of health, which at this point is fairly limited, but trying to really kind of figure out what is the appropriate role of local boards of health and how can they be supportive, and how can we support what has been a fairly bumpy process at the beginning. Clearly we are lagging behind our fellow states right now in rollout, and so there's been a lot of back and forth about how to make that process better. Additionally, and I don't know if Mark will speak to this, but through our work with the North Suffolk Public Health Collaborative, Mark in particular has been on the ground helping Revere, Chelsea, and Winthrop set up their first responders vaccine clinic, and really trying to make sure those communities, and we're also really trying to work with some of our harder hit communities, have the capacity to figure out. There are also many of the communities with the least local capacity to actually have their local boards of health stand up clinics, help them find partners and figure out how to set that up. And then lastly, and I don't know if Mark wants to mention this, but we've been very involved in conversations with the administration about how to expand vaccination to seniors and senior affordable housing. And we should, hopefully we have a commitment from the administration to create a program there that really targets those housing developments. Mark or Barry, you want to jump in on kind of any other work I've missed or more details you think would be helpful for the officers to know?
Oh, sorry. Sandra, did you have a question first? No. Well, yeah, no, I think Rebecca, you gave a good overview of that. I mean, I guess, we've been spending a lot of time with the vaccination rollout. And I guess if I kind of think about where we've been doing that, I mean, one, we are an affiliate for emergency public health funding with Region 3 up in Northeastern Mass. So that's like everywhere from like Malden up to the New Hampshire border, up to the Merrimack Valley. So one area, we've also been kind of, working with those communities to just understand who's doing what and for whom and when, and, what do they need to make that happen? So, I mean, that kind of engaged us in some of the conversations, especially as they were forming regional partnerships to do first responder clinics, because first responders were in phase 1. So a lot of the municipalities really stepped up to do that. And I think a lot of that then, similar work was also done in sort of North Suffolk, as Rebecca mentioned, and otherwise. I mean, I guess the biggest thing is just, as we move from, phase 1 now into phase 2, just trying to, understand sort of what is best for local government to do. And I think the tough thing is one, local governments, I think, have really stepped up. I mean, I think a lot of local health departments, and I think the state was frankly surprised by how many were willing to jump in and do this. And in some ways, I think the state really sadly didn't understand, how good they are at this, and how much they've been preparing to do this for a long time. And, that I think, kind of caught the state somewhat off guard. And I think, part of the outgrowth of that is that as the states move forward, a lot of local governments have wanted to continue to offer, vaccination to residents of their communities as these new phases come online. So for seniors and otherwise, and, frankly, then you run into just persistent supply shortages because, the states, the state only has so much. And I think, frankly, didn't have as much, dedicated to local health departments as it needed to. So it's had to really reduce the amount that local health departments have received, almost to the point where, if you're a local health department, you're only getting 100 doses a week. That really doesn't make hosting a vaccination clinic efficient or effective to do. So, I mean, I think that's been a blow for a lot of local communities to kind of be placed in that bucket. I mean, there are, some, doses for like hard hit communities, like, Metro North communities. They have, slightly more, about 400 per community allocated, but that's still, not a huge amount. So, I mean, I think these vaccination shortages have been a real problem and have been a real barrier to local health departments from playing the role that I think they're ready to and want to do. And I think the other thing that's kind of been negative from from our perspective is that there just didn't seem to really be a plan, particularly from the state in hard hit communities. The state kind of has this, I mean, I don't know, I'd call it kind of like a let a lot of blossoms bloom type approach to this and see who can kind of step up, whether it's the mass vaccination sites that they're creating at like the Gillettes and Fenways, or it's the, pharmacies that they're kind of standing up, like a lot of CVS's and Walgreens are going to be offering this. And then there's the local health departments. But, it really isn't, they really didn't think about, what are those communities that are in greatest need and what capacity and resources do they need to pull together, and really working across sectorally with the hospitals, the health partners, health centers, the local health departments, pharmacies, ambulance companies, medical reserve corps, all these players to kind of make that happen. And I think that's been unfortunate. And it's something that we're continuing to press the state to try to address. But I mean, I would say, like, for every time we think, we see what the path is, the path changes. And I think that's probably going to be true, going forward as well. So, I mean, we're describing kind of the situation as it stands now. Maybe more doses will become available at the federal level to the state. Maybe that'll change things. Maybe they'll kind of hear us and what we're advocating for with local health departments. And they'll also, start to provide them with more vaccine and more support. So I think that's some of what we've been looking at. I mean, vaccination seems to be dominating a lot of thought and effort right now. Obviously, the virus is, still spreading, and there's other things to deal with. But I'll stop there, and Barry can take over.
I mean, I'll just plug it in. So if I think Mark really kind of provided the bulk of where our focus is at the moment too. But I think to echo what he was saying, I think the three things that we really have on our mind, for me, it's a helpful framing, is mitigation, evolution, and vaccination. Those three being like three big pillars. Mitigation being, what are we doing to kind of stop transmission as much as we can within the moment? And so we've seen some positive stuff within the data for the state and within our region as well too. And so we're tracking that at least internally, a little bit more externally too, around a lot of that data to see what's happening in terms of case rates, positivity, what was happening in the hospitals. We're realizing that transmission is going to continue to happen and we don't want to tick back up. So what do we do to kind of continue to keep that down? And so we're doing work related to wastewater monitoring, continuing to think about whether or not we can help places kind of have the information, or where possible, kind of direct and stand up testing to do that kind of work, the data support, and then also kind of communications work as well too. And so a lot of that is looking where there are gaps and where we can really plug in. I think Mark hit it though, but both staff at the public health departments and boards of health, but I know plenty of other municipal staff are pitching in either at tents or kind of making calls and doing all that stuff. I mean, everybody is on overdrive, continues to be on overdrive. So we're really looking for where we can be supportive in relation to that work too. And the other thing I'll just highlight is that we continue to look at where there are opportunities for kind of shared responses, or essentially kind of collective or coordinated responses. And so in North Suffolk, which is Chelsea River Winthrop, we're continuing this idea of what would it be like to have a regional epidemiologist on hand, someone who could really kind of help in that particular data investigation or kind of research support. And then we just had a call last week too to kind of look at essentially what other kind of coordination can happen to really kind of lift up kind of bright spots within the vaccination efforts. Because I think, as Mark referenced, some places are really strong, other places may not be. How do they get partnered? How do they kind of take the information and resources that one has done to use, kind of create a really efficient mechanism for that vaccination effort, and lift that to other places and make sure that happens too. So we continue to look for those commonalities, because we think coming out of this pandemic, on the hopeful side, there'll be more opportunities for kind of both kind of shared service responses. But when we look at greater investments that might be coming to public health, how do we do that in kind of a collective way that, again, is making advantage of the kind of the resources, somewhat the limited staffing capacity that exists when you go beyond our current staffing, but the kind of the challenges that will continue to present public health. So I'll stop there.
Good, Sandra.
Oh, just a couple of things. I mean, for whatever it's worth, Bedford is one of the towns that, I mean, it's ready to administer doses. I mean, local governments do flu vaccines, so why wouldn't it? So I agree with that. One just sort of small thing, but we have no vaccine. One small thing is why we haven't heard from Mary Lou Sutters in like 6 or 8 months. I mean, it's just a puzzle to me. I guess that's just neither here nor there, but I just don't quite get it. Like, where is somebody besides Charlie Baker and all this? But my substantive question is, Bedford, and I'm sure, and many other towns have state-owned senior housing. Is the state going to take responsibility for vaccinating these folks? I mean, it just feels
Well,
like.
let me speak to that a little bit if I could, Sandra. First of all, we see Mary Lou a lot. I mean, she's usually at every press conference with the governor, and he turns it over to her almost every day. She's been on the last 2 phone calls that we have with the lieutenant governor and with the with a group of about good morning, Margie, with a group of about 30 mayors and managers that we have every Friday.
That's all I see.
And, you know, so we see her a lot. Whether or not she is really up to date on all the details is kind of a debate that we have internally. We're never sure. Sometimes she is directive and informative. Sometimes she is defensive and kind of, you know, protecting the administration in what I hope will not necessarily be reflected in the minutes. But she does seem to be actively engaged on, for better or for worse, on senior subsidized housing. I'll try and make this short if I can, but it is more complicated, and I'm glad to have an offline conversation about it. Through the federal pharmacy program, which is called FPPP, a certain number of subsidized housing developments, all of which were funded through the federal 202 program, directly set up clinics at the residences with the pharmacies providing the injections. And that was done and is being done through the CDC. That is federally monitored and implemented. But that was only about 100 of roughly 1,200 senior subsidized housing developments, both public housing and private housing in the Commonwealth. So the state has stood up a program for the remainder, but it requires considerably more active engagement by the owners and operators of that housing, which in some cases are private owners and managers, and in some cases are local housing authorities. They are being encouraged to find medical partners and set up clinics at their individual housing developments. In some cases, those are being handled by the housing authority and by private managers. In some cases, the town or city is sort of swooping in and coordinating that for all of them. Those clinics, although there are certain exceptions, probably shouldn't start until the state goes to the 65 plus phase, which we anticipate will be in the latter third of February. And so we are now in a period of 3 weeks of planning for that so that they can be planned, scheduled, and there's the necessary staff, and you have the necessary approvals from the residents, permissions, and that they can actually begin promptly at that point in time. We have been assured that the Commonwealth will provide additional vaccine for those clinics above and beyond the amount that is provided through the municipal allocations, dependent only, of course, upon whether or not the feds actually make the vaccines available. This is, I think, a good step forward, even though it's complicated to administer. We are expecting to be holding a webinar on this for local officials and others, either the end of this week or the very beginning of next week. And it leaves unanswered 2 additional questions, which I was discussing a little with Rebecca and Lizzie yesterday. One of which is, what about the people over 65 who live in family housing? And 2, much more broadly, is there going to be a local system for all subsidized housing at the point when we come to the general public? So those are remaining questions, but we are working on it, and I can provide additional information offline.
Thank you so much. Is there any other questions, comments? Adam?
I just wanted to add, as I try to do every time we talk about this, a thanks to Mark and Rebecca and Barry and Mark and Lizzie and the whole team for their just continual awesome work on all of this. And to not repeat anything that Mark and Barry shared, because I think they covered it well. I think the only thing I'd add from my perception is that it doesn't appear to me, I mean, I'm sure it's happening, but it's hard to see that anybody at the state level is even looking 2 or 3 weeks ahead of now. It feels like everything is a scramble to figure out what tomorrow brings. And I'm not a rocket scientist, but I hope that something near tomorrow brings a lot more vaccine, and we need to figure out how to get it out and distribute it. And it doesn't seem like that's there. And I think that is like potentially that is being driven by the fact that there doesn't seem to be one point person whose sole job is vaccination at the state level. There's a couple smart people that the state puts before us that have roles in vaccination, but have a lot of other parts of their job too. And it seems, I guess I'm just speaking for myself, it's frustrating that there isn't a vaccine czar, for lack of a better term. That's sole focus is figuring out on where capacity is, how that capacity can be mobilized, and how we can be ready for when vaccines are actually starting to be distributed. So I know we're all collectively continuing to work on this, but yeah, I maybe more than anything, I'm feeling like it's very frustrating to have to feel like you're clawing for an opportunity for your community and other communities to help, as opposed to being welcomed as someone who can help very well in getting that vaccine out there.
Adam, in response to that, I would note, if I may, Aaron, that Rebecca particularly has pointed out that we need to continue to focus on the longer term, and we are trying to do that. And Adam knows this because he's involved in a lot of these calls. It is frustrating. It is sometimes difficult to get the Commonwealth to do that. I think paradoxically, or maybe it's expected, the more, when they have difficulty performing and they are then under a lot of pressure, and they have been under a tremendous lot of pressure for the problems with the vaccine rollout, the natural inclination, if it's Tuesday, is to focus on what you can get done by Wednesday, because you're in a crisis. And things do need to be done by Wednesday. But at the same time, we are going to enter into a period of time when hopefully more vaccine is available, and we need to have a robust and much broader distribution system. And I think one of what we are trying to emphasize is we are trying to spend a little less time on the question of what should the rollout phases be, who should get what when, who comes ahead of whom, not because we don't have opinions on that, but because we don't really think we have the best ability to influence that. And much more time and focus on the more limited question of what can the role of local government be in trying to enhance and stand up and improve the vaccination system. Come depend on us, like just give us the resources and the guidance, and we'll do X, Y, and Z for you. What is X, Y, and Z that you need the localities to do? And we actually think those roles are going to get more robust as more vaccine becomes available. And it's my hope that in most cases, this isn't always this way, but in most cases, the role of local government can try and be particularly, not exclusively, but particularly to reach the harder to hit, more resistant or more highly impacted populations. Seniors in subsidized housing, people with disabilities, single mothers with 3 kids and 2 jobs. It's like there's a lot of different groups that are hard to reach. And if our system is heavily focused on go to Gillette, go to Fenway, go to one of 71 pharmacies, as I've said in what is a little bit of an exaggeration, but I'll say it nonetheless, all the white people with cars will get vaccinated and our numbers will go up. And a lot of other people with greater difficulties will not. And I'm hoping that local government can help through specific programs to address some of those unmet needs. And that is where we are focusing a lot of our time and attention. I might also note just one more thing. I think the governor's current limitations on capacity. It's mostly capacity limitations at this point. I think are up on Friday, and some effort will be needed to try and encourage him to extend those, because I think the likely inclination would be to lift them. I don't know that for sure, but I'm concerned about it.
Well,
think Sam
no
had his
one
hand up.
knows communities better than those who work for their communities.
Yeah.
Sam?
So I just want to add a comment. I had and a question, but the question doesn't need an answer. Just that this is that moment that I've thought about for COVID about it, almost everything, is that we finally have stressed the system to the point of breaking, and you can see how it works and how it doesn't work. And it just occurs to me to add to that we have all throughout our governmental processes these layered systems of government, whether it's federal, state, local, and then even within local, it gets more specified. And the planner side of me says, the long range 30,000 foot side says this is the opportunity to see what's working, what isn't working, because there should be, to use the military metaphor that's always used, there should be an after action review of what has worked and what hasn't worked, so that we could do it better. I mean, the only reason to create this multi-layered interwoven system is that so you have presumably flexibility, resiliency, strength, robustness at the different levels. And it seems as though we stress the system and it hasn't really functioned very well. A question that doesn't need a long answer, but I'm curious what the transmission stream for the vaccine is. It's made in a lab, it's bought by the federal government, it's then distributed out to the 50 states, and then the 50 states have to sort of figure out what they're going to do with it. That's what I'm hearing. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but those are my comments.
That's pretty much right on.
And I guess I would say I think we're missing a layer here, which is a regional, in the most of the rest of the country, there is a regional public health system. And, I've been watching my home state of Michigan very closely, who I will say is, I think, 5th right now in vaccinations, the most populous state in terms of percentage vaccinated, and before Guam, the lowest rate of transmission. So I'll give my state a little bit of credit. They don't get a lot of credit for good governance, but they have a county system there, and for public health, and the counties are the ones that are making up the plans. And even here, we've heard that it's working better in Berkshire County because they have a regional health district that's partnered with their regional hospital system and come up with a comprehensive approach where folks are working together. And here in Eastern Mass, it's just incredibly fragmented. And so I think that lack of a regional system, particularly right now, is part of what's harming us in the vaccine rollout.
I mean, it's worth saying too on the regional stuff, like in some ways, because of COVID, there's been more regional collaboration than we've kind of ever seen. And I'd say that was especially true with the vaccine rollout, because, immediately a lot of communities just started to partner together, to provide clinics, to do like first responders and want to continue those. I mean, I think, in a world where, the state often talks about supporting such, initiative, for, regional collaboration. I mean, that's one thing we'd like to see is them to give some level of primacy to these regional local clinics, over kind of the pharmacies and others when it comes to vaccine, because, it's kind of what we want to see happen within the local health system. And, if the state could give them kind of a leg up, I think it would happen. And the vaccination would be a great place to start and see that grow. So.
Yes, Barry.
Thanks, Aaron. I just wanted to echo again what Adam, I guess, to say thanks for what you said, Adam, for us, and echo that back to you all, knowing the work that you all are doing as well too. But just as kind of context, I think for this as well is that, and this gets to your point, Adam, as well too, about the 2 to 3 weeks out, is that essentially we're going to move at some point from an overwhelming demand but not enough vaccine to probably sufficient vaccine but maybe not enough participation. And I think just as a reminder, we see huge participation, people over 65, under 18 in our current kind of just regular flu vaccine, but that 18 to 64 is actually it's like 40 to 45% compliant like year to year. So if we're looking to get to 70 to 80%, just again, as we're thinking about that further part and think about what we're doing, there will become a part where essentially like it'll become less of a response and more of a push. And I think that idea of shifting of people coming to us going to people, a little bit to the point you were making, Mark. So anyway, I think just for us too, is like keeping in mind, like we are in this moment where we have this bottleneck, but we're also going to have to then shift that to the other side where we're going to have that piece of it too. So again, just a little bit of forecasting and thinking about what our messaging is doing, what that regional collaboration is doing, and what kind of that coordination with the state is going to allow us to do once it opens up more.
I might note, Rebecca didn't mention this, I think, because we don't have the money in the bank yet. But Barry particularly has been working very hard on an application to the Bar Foundation to try and receive additional communications money that we can use for messaging efforts, largely to communities of color and low-income communities in some of the most highly impacted communities, that we would undertake with community-based organizations, faith leaders, and local governments in those communities particularly. We don't have a knot tied on this yet, but I'm hoping we're going to get there. And it will help us. I think it'll be just one more thing that we're doing to try and help out with some of these longer term, really critical objectives to get us up to a higher percentage of vaccination once we have the necessary supply.
Great. Thank you all for your feedback and conversation and updates. I really appreciate it. Anyone else before we move on and Barry and Mark can get to other things? Great. Thank you so much, Barry and Mark, for joining us and giving us an update and all your hard work, as well as Lizzie and the rest of the team. Really appreciate it.
Pass it along. Thank you.
Great. Have a good one.
You too.
Next up on the agenda is the, oh, everything kind of just shifts around. Okay. It's very disorienting. I don't know why. It's very Brady Bunch right now, which I kind of like. Okay, so next up on the agenda is the Executive Committee agenda review for February 24th, 2021. I don't know, Mark, if you want to say something, Rebecca.
Well, I would appreciate it if someone would put it on the screen.
Sure.
Sasha, I don't know if you can do that.
Yeah.
Yes, I can do that. One second.
The draft executive committee agenda.
Yep. She has that.
While she's doing that, I would note this was an exceptionally preliminary one because I think we're not meeting until the 24th of February, I believe is the date. And so I put in yellow things that we're not 100% sure about. Rebecca, I didn't get a chance to ask you, do you anticipate that we'll be ready on 3B and C for this meeting, or does some of that come later?
Well, it normally comes for the March meeting. No, Heidi, do we do it in February? I mean, I think we'll be there. We've gotten the information from all but 3 departments. I just got an email from Sheila this morning. And I do know, Sam, that we have our finance committee meetings scheduled. So as long as those meetings, I think, move smoothly, which I have no reason to think they wouldn't, I think we'll be ready by the 24th.
All right. Well, we'll do the best we can. The council meeting is very early in March. It's the 3rd of March.
Then we have to do them.
Yeah, so I think so.
It will be done.
Good.
That's fine.
Okay. And it including the assessment vote? Do we usually do that at the same time?
Normally do the assessment vote at the
I just didn't remember.
Meeting. If folks remember, we canceled. Do you remember that was when we were canceling things due to an abundance of caution? We canceled the March meeting last year. So that's why we did it at the May meeting. But I think DLS would prefer us to do it in March.
Okay. All right. So doing it in March then means that we will probably have it at the February Executive Committee meeting, because it all has to wrap into the budget that we're approving in March, on March 3rd. If you could move that down just a little bit, Sasha, to the other yellow items. So we will have a project update. I don't know what it is yet, but we will. And the legislative staff, in addition to working very hard on filings based on the approvals they've already received from the executive committee, is working on 2 excellent memos. I've seen early drafts on recovery efforts and additional revenue for the Commonwealth. I do not want to commit them to having those done and through legislative committee by February, but I am hoping that we will get at least one of them. And if not, we'll take that up in March.
I think with the filing deadline being pushed, it might be better to push this till March, because I know we're still very much now, finishing with the filing deadline. We thought we would be done at this point, as well as, we're already moving into, the climate legislation was passed. We're already kind of moving into that. So I think the team might be better served by moving this into March.
All right, so we will continue to work on that going forward, and there will be a project update. So that's the executive committee agenda, but very drafty, as I said, more than 3 weeks out.
Great. And then
No action is needed.
Okay. And then just for the March meeting, I think when it comes to the legislative update, and I think we should probably allot more time than we have been for legislative, if there's anything substantive, because I feel like we run over with legislative stuff. I feel like that's a large reason why people participate in the meeting. I feel like that's the thing they get the most chatty on, which is great. But we can just adjust in March on that. Any questions or comments? And I can only see half of you.
Just a comment. Should we?
You're on the other page. Yes, Dan.
Should MAPC or some do a victory lap on housing choice? That's only been 20 years in the making, at least some of that. Or do you not want to do a victory lap? I mean,
I think it's important to recognize housing choice was not 20 years in the making. All the other things that we didn't get were 20 years in the making. Housing choice was about 3 years in the making. It's a very good accomplishment. It's a better accomplishment because of other things that we got. We got multifamily, and we also got abutter appeals. I'm not particularly focused on the victory lap at the moment. I'm focused on, trying to get an understanding for our communities of what they mean and how and when they're going to be implemented. And, where we are actually planning a webinar on that as well, although I think that's 2 to 3 weeks out from now, in all likelihood.
Well, I think it was 6 years. Let's not shorten our memory too much, but I think it was part of the opt-in section. But I think, Sam, other important context is that, at the end of session, with the climate veto, and then in the housing bill, a veto of tenant protections, and then in the transportation bill, a veto of the low income fare, and in the climate bill had this big environmental justice perspective. I think, folks that are really focused on equity and kind of the more progressive side are feeling like they really lost everything. And so it's just not, housing choice is a great victory, but it is something we did, in partnership with the real estate and business community. And I think that, that we have to just be reflective of kind of everything that happened at once. There was a lot of great things we got, but a lot of the most progressive pieces, a lot of the things that really help low income folks the most were what we lost. And so that's what we have to be mindful of as well.
I completely agree with Rebecca. I think that it would be it's kind of unfortunate because we did accomplish some important things here, but it would be a little tone deaf, I think, for us to do too much celebrating at the moment. And we have to remember, even though this is hard to remember, and it's very complex relationships, that there are elements of housing choices that are considered to be creative of displacement in low-income communities. There are many folks that feel that transit-oriented development, that more aggressive market or even mixed income development in their community is a cause of displacement. I don't think that is completely accurate, but at the same time, it is also not completely without foundation. And so we have to understand that when the things the real estate industry wants pass, and the other more progressive things to try and help to control the negative impacts of those otherwise good things fail, there are many people within our constituencies that do not see this as a positive development. And we have to be respectful of that, even if we don't completely agree.
Makes sense.
Got
Makes
it.
sense.
Great, thank you. Any other questions or comments on the agenda? I guess I would just say legislatively, I think I saw, although I was clearly disappointed with a lot of the housing choice, the lack of what I feel could have been really great progression, and I haven't really been quiet on that, obviously, over the last few months. I am really optimistic because I feel like for the first time in a long time, I feel like things are not operating in vacuums. Like we're talking about climate, we're talking about transportation, and we're talking about housing, and there's overlap of those three kind of areas and disciplines, where I feel like previously, maybe when we had that climate conversation or the housing conversation, it was not always, it was only like when we talked about housing, we talked about housing. We didn't talk about how people moved around. We didn't talk about, how density affects climate change. And I feel like that's hopefully the start of many overlapping disciplines and progression moving forward. So I'm hopeful, at least today. So
There is much more conversation across disciplines at this point in time. I think it actually helped. I still wouldn't have preferred it, but I think it actually helped that you had the economic development bill with housing provisions, the transportation bill, the climate bill, all moving at the same time. It forced people to have meaningful conversations. And I particularly am hopeful that the climate and the housing folks are going to begin to speak with one more voice. There are a number of indications of things that are happening that are positive in that regard. I won't get into them now. It's still going to be a struggle from time to time, but I think there can be much more joint effort.
yeah, no, I agree. And I think that when people are kind of, I don't want to say forced into those conversations, they realize that they have more things in common than they do not in common. So I'm hopeful, at least on February 1st, I am hopeful.
That's right.
So it's a good way to start the week. Okay, Sasha, we are good, I think, with sharing the screen. Thank you. Back to Brady Bunch style. Appreciate it. Okay, next up on the agenda, I really miss my dual screens in my office. Next up on the agenda is the date of the next officers meeting, which is Monday, March 1st. Everyone have that on your calendar? Great. Big discussion on that. And then we have other business not known at the time of posting the agenda. So I know Margie is here. And I don't know, Mark, do you want to?
I will only say, I will ask that we go into executive session in order to discuss a matter of pending litigation.
Did we not want to talk about the council meeting, or is that afterwards? I'm sorry, I don't have the agenda.
Oh, you're right.
Oh, did I miss that? I'm sorry.
Sorry, just before we go into executive session, I do think it's important just to have a little check-in on
Oh,
the
yeah,
council meeting.
I did. I skipped it.
'Cause
Sorry.
it's so close to the next officers meeting.
Yep. Sure. Sorry. I got so excited for executive session. So our next council meeting is Wednesday, March 3rd. It is, we discussed it at executive committee last week. It's a morning meeting, correct? All on Zoom, right here. Mark, you noted about starting at 9:30?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll start whenever Heidi tells me she wants to start, within that range. 9:30, Heidi?
Yes. Yeah.
9:30.
Right.
And there's not a lot of, other than the mid-year budget and the local assessment vote, there's not a lot of business meeting on this. I think we wanted to ask the officers' thoughts on the program portion of it. I think, Mark, you had thought we should have something on MetroCom, and I think Rebecca and I had talked about maybe something on where this is the first year, we're ending our first year completely remote,
working remotely with COVID, that might be a good time to have a discussion about that, but we wanted to hear from the officers about your thoughts. And nobody has.
Anyone want to speak?
Are we being asked of what the major topic is going to be?
Yeah, I think Heidi's saying she's asking for feedback, what our focus should be, and Rebecca, I don't know if you want to say anything else.
Yeah, I think I could go back and forth on whether we should focus on COVID. It feels like all of our life is focused on COVID. Yet it is the 1-year anniversary. And, I think we've been doing a tremendous amount of work that we haven't necessarily spent the time to communicate about to the public because we've just been so busy getting things done behind the scenes. I could also say we could wait till May. Maybe things will feel a little bit lighter and the folks that are doing the work will have a little bit more breathing room to actually be able to put together some presentations about the work that they've done. Mark and I had talked about, I just want to remind when we did the Davidson Award, we got lots of nominations, really based on this team that is doing the real on the ground work around COVID. And Mark and I had talked about doing a special kind of recognition. We couldn't pick any one of them. So, it felt like maybe we could do some group thing. I could say we could do it now. We could also wait till May. It just still feel like we're still just so in the midst of it. It's hard to recognize folks, but, at the same time, the May meeting is incredibly filled with business, with elections, with budget, et cetera. And so I am, wondering whether we wanted to maybe do that special recognition where we could do a little bit more of an explanation of really what is the work on the ground that's been happening. It might be a nice moment to do that. I'm worried that May might feel too crowded.
Sam?
I just to go slightly meta on this topic, which I think Heidi brought up, which it might be really interesting to look at the transition to this whole online world. I mean, it first of all, everybody has had to deal with it and they've all had successes and failures in kind of making the transition. It does have huge planning implications. I mean, it may change the way we work. It may change the way we commute. It may change the way we go to school, et cetera, et cetera. It might be an interesting way of looking at COVID without having to talk about 450,000 dead people in the United States, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And no vaccines, no plan for distribution. It might be interesting because I think
what's wrong with that subject, Sam? You don't like that? You don't think we should spend the whole hour on that?
That's what I do the rest of the time. Just think about it. I like to process my little debt clock. I don't know. It's just a thought that it'd be another way of marking the year that everybody's dealt with, but they probably don't stop to think about it. But it has real planning import too. Just a thought.
Sandra?
Or what about I guess maybe this has already been done, but the implications, kind of what Sam is saying for, what municipalities can keep about the current situation that has worked and what hasn't, in terms of online meetings, some hybrid, what we've learned that we can use going forward.
I think it could be a good opportunity to just kind of what I was thinking about is kind of talking about like what kind of shifting we've all done over the last year. And maybe it's like a nice opportunity to kind of talk about kind of looking ahead and thinking about, the regionalization, the partnerships, like things we can do moving forward. As much as we're still all in it, it doesn't, at least to me, it doesn't, even though the vaccine thing is like kind of crazy right now locally, but I feel like it doesn't feel as chaotic. And maybe I've just become immune to the chaos. It doesn't feel as chaotic as it did 9 months ago. And maybe it's because there's like, a little light at the end of the tunnel. So I think at least what I've seen is that we're still dealing with like crisis mode stuff locally, but I feel like we're talking a lot more about like solutions moving forward. Whereas like 9 months ago, we were just like, how are we going to survive the day? That was kind of like the perspective, at least how I saw it back then. I don't know how everyone else feels. I do want to kind of say that I don't want to talk about, I don't want to say I don't want to talk about, I just feel like sometimes it comes across a little tone deaf when we talk about everyone is working from home. It feels very insensitive in a lot of ways for particularly municipal employees who have been going in. I mean, I'm at home right now, but I do go in and we're still dealing with the public in person. And it varies from town to town what that process looks like, but it's hard. It's really hard when I have, when I'm working with state agencies or state departments and they're like, oh, it's so great. We work from home and I'm not going back to the office until fall at the earliest. And I'm just like, please don't rub it in. It's very hard for a municipality. I don't know if Adam feels that way. I just roll my eyes because I would love to be in that situation where I'm not commuting as well with everyone else. I don't know.
And,
I have a lot of
of
feelings.
course, even more than municipal workers, but I've spoken with lots of municipal workers who are going into work. But even more than them, essential workers who never have the option at all
Yes.
of working at home, not even 1 hour or 1 day. And I think that the media tends to cover this as everyone's working from home in America, and that is completely false.
Mm.
So,
Yeah.
One issue that I'm struggling too, because I'm looking for what can we do that's a little uplifting and hopeful, and yet I keep thinking about things that are problems. And I do strongly feel that one of the elements that we as a society haven't paid enough attention to is the gender bias of the recession that we're in currently, and the gender bias of the impact of COVID on women, women at home, women in the workplace, women in terms of earning potential, women in terms of educational attainment, and a whole host of things. I'm sure you've heard the term that some people are beginning to refer to this recession as a she-cession. And I don't know what I think about the term, but it properly identifies a problem that doesn't seem to be getting much attention. And I think we as a planning agency actually have a responsibility to pay some attention to that. So that's another thing I'll just throw in the hopper. But like Rebecca, I have no dog in the hunt about exactly what we should do on March 3rd. I just have a lot of ideas.
Well, I think if we did that as an idea, and then maybe we should move on because I do want to be mindful of time. It has been interesting that I think that Senate President Spilka and Representative Clark have been the two leaders that I have seen speak the most to this in terms of our meetings with them. And I know that, for example, that Senator Spilka is really going to be pushing paid sick leave legislation in the next session, and that Representative Clark is looking at how to stabilize the early education system and provide better childcare and early education opportunities. That was actually, just so folks know, in our call with her, which was, I think, 2 days after the coup, that was the first thing that she brought up as her number one priority. And I really noticed that. So we could potentially, invite one of them to talk a little bit about their role or their thoughts in that, to kind of start a conversation. And then the last thing I would say is if we do choose to do Metro comment, I would just say, I know Adam and Aaron were both on. We had a meeting for municipal officials. I thought the breakout sessions were excellent. And I find that if we really wanted to talk about how local government should change, that might be an interesting topic. I felt like sometimes it's hard to get impact or input on state or federal policies. It's something that I think our council knows some, but not tons about. But local government, I thought people just had really insightful, wonderful thoughts. And maybe we could focus the Metro Common piece a little bit, I think, if we wanted to do that, to kind of have a productive conversation. But maybe we can bring it back to a staff committee and come back to you guys with some ideas at the executive committee.
Could I just chime in on Rebecca's thought, just as a framing question to local government changing, as a question for a session? How many of you participants want to go back to exactly how it was in February of 2020? Is that your goal, is to return to your working day, 12 months ago, 12 months and 1 day ago? Is that what you would like to achieve? Maybe as a way of kind of sparking the conversation of, well, no, we actually learned some very good, useful things, and we were able to change some things that we never would have changed. Just a thought.
Great.
Well, we have plenty to think about. Rebecca and I will put our heads together and talk to some other members of the staff. I think we have input from you folks. You can send us additional input. If you think of something, just email us. And I would say within the next week to two, we will come up with our agenda. We did focus on MetroCommon in the last one. I mean, we're in the run-up to finalizing the plan now, but we did focus it on the last one, and I can't imagine we won't focus on it in May. So it might be appropriate not to focus all of the March meeting on MetroCommon, but I would want to discuss that with Eric and get his input.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Okay, so now we are going to go to other business not known at the time of the posting. So Mark, can we?
Yes, I am making a request that we go into executive session to discuss pending litigation.
So moved.
And with that motion, Adam, can you also move that we will adjourn the meeting in executive session, the regular? Is that okay, Margie?
I accept that friendly amendment.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Sandra. So the motion has been made by Adam and the second made by Sandra. Roll calls required. Sam?
Aye.
Sandra?
Aye.
Adam?
Aye.
And Erin? Aye. Great. We are virtually going into executive session. Thanks all.
Okay, and you'll be able to leave from there.